Hello, everybody, and welcome to Innis Town Hall. We are so excited to have you tonight here, and we just want to apologize about the heat, but it's obviously an index of how excited we all are for this fire-hot event we're going to have. Now, if you're all scratching your head and wondering what happened to Charlie Kyle, did he suddenly get shorter and more fashionable? No, that's not quite the case. Nor has he been ousted from his position at Innis. Hi, Charlie. He's watching from home. Unfortunately, he's a little under the weather. So I'm standing in as the host. You may be then scratching your head and saying, so who is this masked stranger? And my name is James Leo Cahill, and I'm the director of the Cinema Studies Institute here at the University of Toronto and a co-collaborator with Charlie and the Innis team on a lot of great events. Now, I'm so delighted, really, to welcome you to this most eagerly anticipated of events. When I first heard about this event, I was like, cannot wait till we get to May. So before we begin the proceedings, though, I wish to deliver the land acknowledgement. I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And I'm really also grateful to have the opportunity to introduce tonight's moderator, Eva-Lynn Jagoe. So Eva-Lynn is Vice Principal, newly installed, of Innis College, and also a professor of comparative literature and Spanish here at the University of Toronto. She is author of a memoir entitled Take Her, She's Yours, and a writer of creative nonfiction essays. Eva-Lynn is interested in how we make sense of ourselves, both in terms of grappling with the past and understanding the society that shapes our beliefs and actions. Her research is focused on film, literature, and environment and culture. She is also a Linegar yoga teacher and spends time on a small farm in interior BC. So, Eva-Lynn, take it away.
Well, thank you, James, for that, and hi, Charlie. We miss you. Sorry that you're not here, but I'm kind of glad because I got the chance to do this. And the whole time I was reading Sarah's book, I was like, I want to talk to her. I really want to talk to her. So this is, you get to watch me enjoy myself. So, I mean, we're going to take off our masks, so I'm going to go for it now. Sarah Polley needs no introduction, but I will give you one anyway. She is an Academy Award-nominated screenwriter, director, and actor, and now also a writer, always a political activist. After making short films, Sarah made her feature-length directorial debut with the drama film Away From Her in 2006. Polley received an Oscar nomination for the screenplay, which she adapted from the Alice Munro story, The Bear Came Over the Mountain. Her other projects include the documentary film Stories We Tell, which won the New York Film Critics Circle Prize and the National Board of Review Award for Best Documentary, the miniseries adaptation of Margaret Atwood's novel Alias Grace, and the romantic comedy Take This Waltz. Polley began her acting career as a child, starring in many productions for film and television. I actually feel weird at having added that on, like after reading your book. Anyway, so maybe I retract that one. We can talk about that. So I think without further ado, we just go sit down and we start talking. Thank you. And is this, yeah. Okay, I was wondering how much I had to project. I wanted to talk about you as a writer, and I guess I wanted to give a bit of background, which is to say, since I didn't grow up in Canada, I didn't know that you were an actor. And so I only knew you as a director, and I had that in my mind when I went to read this book, but I didn't really get the whole background to who you are, and like how other people in Canada would be reading you. So I feel like I came at this book maybe a little bit naively, which maybe made, I've been trying to figure out why the reading was so exciting to me. Like I actually got to the point where I couldn't read you before bed. Yeah, because there was something just so riveting about your writing, and I couldn't stop myself writing, and it would get later and later reading, and I was like going to sleep late, so I had to stop that. But what I wanted to talk about first was how amazing I think the Alice story is, and I wanted to ask you, I guess more generally, I wanted to ask you, like, what order did you write the pieces in? And my conjecture is that piece was maybe one of the final pieces, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but the reason that I think it is because it's such an accomplished piece of writing. The way that it weaves together these narratives, like through taking the story of Alice and like the story of Alice Little, through the whole piece, you touch upon so many different things that happened in that moment, and the curving body and the curving Alice, and the whole relationship to the father, and everything else. So I thought it was so amazing, and I just wanted to ask you about that writing process and you as a writer.
Sure. I mean that one was written over decades. Like I began that essay, I think, when I was 18 or 19, and I picked it up again when I was 24, 25, and then again in my early 30s. And so it was sort of strange because it was, I finished it when I was 40, but it was this strange collaboration between all these different iterations of myself. But ultimately I had to follow the tone and the writing style of the 18-year-old me, which is, I think, why it actually feels different and maybe better than the others. I think I was a better writer then. No. But it was an interesting thing to sort of like capture the spirit of how I was trying to convey something and trying to get at the connections between things, because I could feel that all of these strands were speaking to each other, but I had a lot of questions about how or why. Like it was all this subconscious, really thick, sticky, hard stuff that was being spoken about through my responses to the Alice narrative and my history with my scoliosis and with my dad, and and the stage fright, and all of these things felt like they were speaking to each other. And I think writing the essay was a process of asking the question of why. And I'm not sure I ever completely got to the bottom of that, but it's an exploration of that process. I think I certainly spent the most time coming back to that one, and when I was doing the final writing process of writing them all recently, that was the one that I did the most research on. That was the one like I had to sit with the most. It was also the one that I found like the most perplexing in terms of how it was going to find itself. But they all were in different stages. So I, came back to that one, but I'd also left the one about being a child actor on Road to Avonlea and my trip to PEI. I'd started that when had just come back from PEI a few years ago and just left it. There were a lot of half-written things, and then some things that were new. So the one about my high-risk pregnancy was written in the sort of discrete time frame of writing the book itself. High risk, So that one was written then, and there were a few, like I think the one about the Adventures of Baron Munchausen when I was 8, and a child actor was written in a short period of time. But the rest, there were bits and pieces written over time that I'd abandoned and didn't know what they were part of. I thought, is this the beginning of a book? Is this something I'm writing for myself? Like it was a very organic process of starting to notice how the pieces were speaking together and realizing that they belonged together, and then finding ways of making that thread clearer.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's something that I definitely wondered about. I love the form of the book, that it is these essays that are... You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. Have to really hold it up. Thank you. Thinking about the form of the book and the way that it's a set of essays as opposed to like a full narrative through. And I really like that, because I feel like it can kind of touch upon so many different aspects of your life and kind of remind us all that we are multiple selves, that there isn't there might be some through lines, but there's also disjunctures and breaks, and But when you said about the essays being like when you would have them sitting there and wondering whether they were gonna what they were or what they were part of, did you actually ever imagine like this is the beginning of a book that would have, you know, just one narrative and it's going to be a memoir or whatever?
I wondered about it, especially with the Alice one. I think that was in my mind, was always potentially a book, and then it just wasn't. I mean, then it just sort of ended, you know. So, which was good because I wanted it to be part of the collection. But basically, when I was writing them, again, with the exception of a couple of them, I didn't know what I was writing towards. I was just writing it as long as it took to finish it. There wasn't a sense of this will be a short piece or this will be a book. It was, I'm just going to find out what this is by writing it. And they all sort of ended up finding themselves in this long form essay form.
Yeah, no, amazing. I wanted to ask you about, I guess, one of the things that I think about your book is that even though it is individuals, it's stories about an individual, you, and the things that happen to you, they seem very much about your relationship to other people. And I guess what I was sensing, or maybe, you know, I was reading into this, but there's a subtext of you having been a political organizer and being involved, like making the choice actually to not go to university and to do political activism instead. And I feel like this book is really political in that it shows the story of someone who has encounters and is doing something in her life and coming up against obstacles, but the moment of knowledge and maybe even of like saving grace or something usually comes through another person. So I actually wrote down some of the people. Let me see if I can find it. You know, in the high risk piece, there's the solidarity with the other parents who are in the ward with you. Obviously in the Baron Munchausen one, there's the guy who watches with you and kind of all the people in that piece that validate what happened to you and say like, yeah, you know, this is what was happening. And obviously like with Lucie de Couter also hugging you in that piece. So there's these moments of like you kind of acting within your own bounds, but also like in a larger community or kind of with other people. And so I wonder if that resonates for you or makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had never thought of it that way before, but that I'm glad that comes across, because I do feel like I've been really lucky in terms of people who have sort of stepped out of the shadows at difficult moments. I think that hard stuff happened, but really incredible people also happened to me, and I do think that people are capable of amazing things. I think it's really easy to lose sight of that, and it sounds kind of pat and boring, but it's more and more interesting to me. Like, having grown up quite cynical and been cynical for most of my life, I think what's exciting for me is just realizing like how good people actually can be and how much they can extend themselves. And certainly that happened to me at various stages where people who had, you know, nothing to gain, you know, really extended themselves or showed me generosity or forgiveness or help in moments where I very much needed it. So I think that has been a huge theme in my life, is that, you know, alongside every difficult story, there's also been one of someone, you know, there's always been these kind of like heroes, even if they've only been there for 5 minutes and then they disappear, they have kind of been around. So I've been very, very privileged in that way. I certainly know a lot of people who've had a lot harder experiences than I have who haven't had that. But I feel like it was important to acknowledge that part of my experience and the privilege of that, of having those people arrive at critical moments.
But you've also made that. I mean, I think you are someone who engages with people on a level that makes them want to be. I mean, certainly as an author, I think you've done that, like makes them feel like they have some response to give you or some connection. And I mean, I guess I want to prod a little bit more and ask you to tell us a little bit about the political organizing when you were young and what that was about and how it still fits into your life.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a family that talked about politics a lot. My older brother, when he was a teenager, was, a really committed political activist and used to kind of take me with, his focus was nuclear disarmament, and, it was the 80s, and we were on street corners leafleting, and so that was sort of the beginning of it. And then I remember, I think it was when I was just getting better from my surgery, actually, and it was the election that elected Mike Harris. And it was during that election I decided to canvass for the NDP, not really understanding the social contract at this point. But I was out there, and I was canvassing alone in these weird places by myself, knocking on doors in apartment buildings when I was 15. I was just so excited to be out in the world and engaged in doing something because I'd been stuck in my body for so long and, recovering from the surgery, and suddenly I wanted to be engaged. And then I think I was completely stunned when Mike Harris was elected, when the Conservatives were elected. Was just this shocking thing. And just sort of, you realized all these myths that you have about the place you live and these things that are givens, which probably weren't even givens at the time, but I assumed they were. And, seeing the violence, that people experienced as, their welfare checks were slashed, and seeing it firsthand, I was working with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, so it wasn't some academic project. It was I was living and working among people who were directly affected by these cuts, who were being evicted, who were organizing themselves. And I kind of think, that was my family for a couple of years. And that remains in me as sort of a basic starting point in terms of seeing the world, is that it is structured in an unbelievably unjust way, and the game is rigged, and if you're poor, it's very, very hard to ever encounter the kinds of opportunities that other people who are not poor. I mean, it's a basic thing to say, but it's something that I lived as an experience in terms of the people that I was closest to, and the people who took care of me, actually, and who gave me a sense of home and a sense of purpose and a sense of place at a very young age. So it follows me around. I mean, I feel like I go through stages where I'm very involved and stages where I'm not as involved. And so I think the term activist can get used too loosely for people now. It's you retweet a few things and you're an activist. And that's certainly, the state that I've been in for the last year or two. I haven't been on the ground organizing, but I think at various stages in my life, I hope that, I'll sort of return to that.
There was a question in the audience questions that were sent beforehand that asked you, how do you use, it was something along the lines, and forgive me if I'm butchering your question, but it was along the lines of how do you use art to imagine possibilities in the world that aren't there yet? And so I guess I wanted to kind of pick up on that question and ask you about the connection between art and politics for you. I don't want you to, not a treatise on, but just what has that meant for you as an artist in all the different forms that you've taken with your art?
I mean, I think as I get older, I'm finding my way, that I'm coming more and more sort of back to the politics that I know as you get older, you're supposed to become more moderate, but I actually have found I kind of went away from for a bit, and I'm right back to where I was when I was 16 and 17 in terms of my political outlook. And what that means for me now is it's very hard for me to take on a project that doesn't have something political in it, even if it's a subliminal current or unarticulated. I think if I don't have a strong sense of the meaning of something or the purpose of something or what it's in service of, I can't imagine dedicating years of my life to it. It feels to me like we're in a really urgent time. We're in a world in crisis. And I enjoy art that doesn't address things politically head on, but I'm not sure it's what I want to be making right now or what I can, I think we've all got a lot of pent up frustration and fear and questions and wanting to imagine better things. And, it's wonderful to have a kind of creative outlet to be asking those questions and having those conversations. So it feels to me like where I want to put my focus. I think it's really hard to make art that's political that isn't really didactic. Like, I think that's really challenging. And I think right now, like, I'm willing to risk that. I feel like it's less of a risk than being apathetic, so.
So we might expect a didactic piece from you. I don't really know how to frame this question. I guess I wanted to ask you about men. And I was thinking about, there's a line in your book where you describe yourself and you say, I happily diminish myself, in relation to a man who's kind of larger than life, and who's kind of expecting certain responses from you. And I do feel like that's like a theme that runs through a lot of the essays. You know, the way that you talk about Terry Gilliam, is that how you say his name? You know, and the kind of mix of admiration and frustration and rage and disappointment that you write about in the book. Do you think that this is kind of, well, I'll ask two questions. I mean, do you think that this is a post kind of Me Too feeling that a lot of us women seem to be having right now? Like kind of thinking about our relationships with men who are in power, men who we admired, and kind of rethinking that now that we've got like kind of more information or more understanding or something. That's one question that you could take it in a more general way, and the other more like kind of personal, specific way would be around your father, because I feel like there's such a shift between the father in Stories We Tell and the father in the Alice essay. And in the Alice essay, he does some unforgivable stuff. Like, he is not a good father, and he's you know, he doesn't get a voice like he does in Stories We Tell, where he says, like, you know, we had a great relationship from 11 to 15. You know, we get the story of, well, why did Sarah leave when she was 15? And what happened between ages 11 to 15? And so I don't know if that story was always present to you and you just chose not to tell it in the documentary, or whether you feel like you gained some knowledge that makes you rethink that relationship.
I mean, in answer to the question about my dad, I mean, I do feel it is forgivable. Like, I think I'm sort of there now. I don't think you get to skip steps to forgiveness. I think that you have to go through the angry part, and you have to go through the reckoning, and you have to go through the acknowledgement of the harm. And even then, maybe you don't get there, and I think that's also legitimate. I do feel I'm at a place with my dad of real forgiveness and really understanding his limitations. And the other stories that I've told about him in the past are also true. There are beautiful stories about this beautiful person, and they are as true as a completely negligent father who was not emotionally attuned, who didn't take care of my basic needs, and who kind of shirked his responsibility as a parent. Both are true, and I think that's a really hard thing to confront when you're in the middle of a reckoning with what's happened to you. Like, I don't think it's actually healthy to skip to, yeah, he did all this stuff, but also he was great. Like, I think that's a bit of a like Band-Aid that's gonna make a wound fester. Like, I don't think it's, but I think that having gone through like a lot of time, like thinking about the ways that I felt alone and isolated and scared and not taken care of as a kid, I also kind of see that for him, he did pretty well. You know what I mean? Like, I actually do think, like, if I had lived his life, I might have done a little bit, you know, a little bit less. Like, I don't know. So the fact that it was hard for me, I'm not sure, I'm just not sure it could have gone another way, to be honest with you. So I do feel like he is the person that's in Stories We Tell. He is the person who amazingly was able to find out his daughter was not his biological daughter, and his wife had had an affair on him, and a lot of people knew this and didn't tell him, and his only concern being for, oh my God, felt she had to keep that a secret all these years. This doesn't change my love for you at all. I'd love to meet Harry. This must be so interesting. Like, that he was also that person. Mm-hmm. So I think both things can be true. In terms of the question about like the sort of post, you know, Me Too reckoning, it's, you know, I think what's what's really interesting to me is I had a really heated debate recently with an older man, and he was talking about how he just doesn't, and this is a really smart person, it's not like, this won't make him seem that smart, but this is what he said. He said, what I don't like is how things have to become these big campaigns and movements. Like, we should be talking about like specific experiences, great, or make a film about a specific experience, because I'm working on Women Talking right now. And it's like, making a film about a specific experience, fine, but this whole like idea of this bandwagon or this big movement, it seems like reductive. And it suddenly occurred to me, like my words that came out of my mouth I'd never thought about, but what I said in response to it was, you don't understand that like some of us didn't even know that the specific experiences we had were problematic until there was a movement. Like one shone a light on the other. It wasn't like we all did specific experiences and it created a movement. Like it went both ways. It was a conversation between the universal and our bodies and their experiences. And that was like, I didn't know that, but I suddenly had a moment when, yeah, like a lot of us had not had words for what was wrong with the things that had happened to us and against our will until there was a huge conversation about it from outside that suddenly gave you language. And without language for something, it's just this kind of dark shroud. Like it's something you just cannot cut through or name. So I think that's a tension. Because I do think there is a backlash to the Me Too movement, absolutely. I think people are getting more and more bold about that and more vocal, which isn't to say we shouldn't have difficult conversations and ask the difficult questions, absolutely we should, but there is this sort of pushback against some movement or some sense of cancel culture around it, and it's like, yeah, but this is after a long time of people sucking up experiences, and I think, yeah, the lack of understanding around that concerns me.
Well, yeah, and it's also about, I think what you're so good at throughout the book is showing the ways that one's experiences, especially as a young girl or a woman, are so confusing and ambivalent. And, there's like nurturing and protection and coercion and weirdness and grossness and all of those things together, so that it is very difficult to parse as an individual. And it's also like it shouldn't, now I'm like kind of preaching or whatever, but I think I'm taking this from your book. It shouldn't be the burden of the individual to have to tell this story. So like, I totally agree with what you said. I think you're absolutely right that we didn't even have the language to talk about this until people started saying it. But also that language should be universal as opposed to particular. Like, so that it doesn't mean that everyone has to tell their story if they don't want to tell their story, or or certainly get kind of raked through the coals if they do tell their story.
No, absolutely. I think the pressing thing is to be able to tell it to yourself, is to be able to tell that story to yourself is, I think, the thing that was difficult and necessary and didn't have sort of that language around it that it needed to have. But certainly the process of, telling a story publicly, about those kinds of experiences is something to be thought about and weighed really carefully. We're seeing just watching the trial right now that's happening, the Hogard trial, that happened post Ghomeshi, and when you read the trial transcripts, it's like, Me Too didn't happen in that courtroom. Yeah. Like the questions that are being asked of those young women are questions that imply no knowledge of how people behave post-trauma. And it's, they're questions that rely on rape myths, and that is still what is being asked in a courtroom. So, yeah, people are getting sort of like fatigued by all this crazy Me Too stuff, but it's like we haven't actually like moved the needle that far. So like, don't worry, we've got a ways to go.
Maybe I shouldn't have even said post Me Too, because maybe we're not in the post at all. I wanted to ask about a phrase that you say sometimes, which is about your family, and you say, there were no sacred cows. And I guess I just wanted to ask, like, what is a sacred cow? And what's wrong with sacred cows? Or,
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was definitely raised in a house without boundaries when it came to like what you talked about or what you joked about or what you made fun of someone for or how you went after what was most sensitive. And there was a sort of jockeying sort of thing that happened. And on the one hand, it's great to have a sense that you can say anything and that other people are like not lying to you. And also that there's nothing that's taboo. Like there is a kind of sense of nothing's off limits and there's a kind of liberation in that, I think, but it's also a very scary place to live where anybody could say anything to you at any time and your feelings are not necessarily a priority. And that's just the culture of my family, which I'm sure I've participated in as well. Like, I don't think I was just a bystander to that. And I think it was like, my dad sort of casting off this sort of idea of Judeo-Christian morality but then what? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what do you, like, there's gotta be some structure, a place to replace that. Like maybe this sort of like nihilistic sense of, there's no right and wrong, there's no good and bad. I think there's a lot to be mined there that's interesting, but in terms of a group of people living together, that can be really treacherous territory.
Did your family seem to you, or do you think that your family thought of itself, and did you also think of your family as exceptional, like kind of different from other people because there were no sacred cows, because you could talk about anything? That would be one question. And then the other is, you're the youngest. And did being the youngest make you feel like you had to try to catch up to get what the humor was, or to kind of insert yourself somehow, or to carve out a space for yourself?
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
I'm a fourth as well. With
Okay.
A kind of no sacred cow kind of family.
Yeah,
so,
I was like, that was really terrifying.
Sorry,
and
I just
insightful.
projected.
Yeah. I think that's right. There is a sense of, like, my siblings are extremely funny. Part of what makes them extremely funny is that they will say the most outrageous things, and sometimes that's scary. And yes, there was definitely a sense of like running along, going, I have to be funny too. I have to make the craziest joke too, and then sort of looking back and going, why did I say that hurtful thing? Like, why did I make somebody feel bad or poke at their most sensitive spot? And it was about fitting into a culture of a family, but at some point you're also complicit in that and have to take responsibility. And that's, I think, been a process of kind of walking that back for myself, and in terms of the family that I'm raising. Like, that is not the environment we have. And I don't know about sacred cows, but it's certainly not okay to make a joke at someone else's expense if it's gonna hurt them. And I'm starting to see it as also kind of like a cheap and boring way of getting a laugh too. You know what I mean? It's actually kind of a really easy way of entertaining yourself, I guess.
Yeah. So do you think that the concussion and the, well, I guess maybe your family's kind of somewhat lack of support or lack of belief in you, do you think that that was like a kind of breaking point around how you wanted to be as someone who was creating a family? Or was it just that you were concussed and having a lot of trouble thinking?
Maybe. I mean, you really are like a last child of a complicated family. It's like, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think that was a difficult period for sure in terms of my family's relationship. I mean, I think I got a lot of attention as a kid, both publicly and within our family. And then that became this sort of recurring theme. And then I had all these health issues, and this can wear on people at a certain point, like that all of the attention is going to this one person. So there may have just been a moment of like being sick of it in my family, which I can be tiring, fair enough. But yeah, it absolutely took a toll, on the relationship between me and some of my siblings, yeah. I wanted to talk to you about the
the body and listening to the body or not listening to the body, because I thought that was so interesting. And I really agreed with you that, there is a sense of you should be able to trust your body and what it's saying to you. And if it doesn't like bright lights, then you shouldn't be in bright lights. And then this other thing of like, well, how do you know it's your body? How do you know it's not your mind? Like, how do you know it's not your fear or whatever? So I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that experience of kind of those two different tracks and trying to figure out how you know what to listen to.
I have like a really amazing example of this that I wish I had had for the book that happened like today and last week on Thursday. Is my youngest kid, Amy, is taking swimming lessons, and she's 3, and she's like never been anywhere. She's like a pandemic kid. So, until 1, she was placed, but at no time that she can remember, she hasn't been in childcare. So she's been in very few places. She's never been in a group environment with a kid. She's never had a teacher. And we're suddenly taking her to swimming lessons. And I was like, how is this gonna go? Like, this is like a kid who asks for bedtime stories about when we used to go to the library. Like this is like gonna be crazy. And I just thought, all my kids have always come back halfway through a swimming lesson crying, going, I'm scared. It's like a normal thing to happen to a kid. And so I was certain it would happen with Amy, and I thought she wouldn't even go. And she kind of just marched like into the pool. And then I looked at her, and she was like, they were sitting on the side of the pool at one point. All the kids were much bigger than her. And she wasn't just shaking, it was like full, like almost convulsing shaking. And I thought, like, is she cold? And I was like, no, that's terror. And so I was kind of trying to make eye contact with her, letting her know, like, you don't have to, like, we can take a break. And at some point she was like, I have to pee. And so she went to pee, and I took her to the bathroom, and I was like, okay, this is it, because she's gonna see me and we're done. And I said, how's it going? She went, yeah, great. And I was like, really? And she said, yeah. And I said, are you shaking because you're cold? And she went, no, I'm nervous. I'm so nervous. Okay, I have to go back in. And it was like, this was like a full body convulsions. Like, it was like, looked like somebody needed to go home. And she was unwilling to take that for an answer. And she had an amazing time swimming, and then was so excited to go back today and was like, do you think I'll be that nervous again? I was like, I don't know, do you? And I was like, what does it feel like to be nervous? And she was like, not good. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't feel good. I was like, but nervousness is actually okay. And I'd never actually been able to convey that to one of my kids or myself. And it was just a moment of going, yeah, like, if she had listened to her body in that moment, she would have missed a great experience that she was really excited to go back to. And I just think it's not to say we should never listen to our bodies, and I do think there are those among us who need to do a lot more of it. And if you are not practiced in that at all, I kind of think you have the opposite project. But I do think we, in my little world, there is a real environment of self-care, which I think great, but can actually get into like creating limits for yourself and what you can actually do and how you can challenge yourself and do things that are out of character, which I think, those are the moments of growth. Like, I mean, I was like, I just feel like we have to do stuff that we don't necessarily feel comfortable with and stuff that we feel we're actually kind of bad at. And that's part of life too. And I think we're kind of creating comfort zones that may be a little bit too cozy sometimes. Unless you're, I have friends that do the opposite. So I think you have to calibrate it. But I was just amazed watching her go through that, because and that's just an instinctual thing that she was like, I'm not gonna let this stop me. It was really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. There was one question which I didn't write down, but it was something like, what if running towards the danger is too overwhelming? So I think you've kind of answered that, but I think you seem to be saying, for some people, your book is not a self-help book. It's not like run towards the danger, everybody. But for you, that's been what's been necessary. But for others, it might be the wrong thing, or maybe it is too overwhelming at a particular time.
Yeah, I think it's so individual. But I think for me, I think just if you have a rocky childhood, you carry around a certain amount of anxiety and a certain amount of a sense that things could go wrong, and so that for me though became a guide in a way. Like, I would sort of get anxious about something, and it became a clear sign to pull back. So like, this project is making me nervous, I'm not going to do this project. Like, traveling is going to make me nervous, I'm not going to travel. Like, it became like this listening to this voice that was actually a voice that belonged in the past. And like, there are ways in which I am safe now that I wasn't then. And I think just for me, the project has been, it's okay to feel anxious. It's not necessarily a stop sign. It may mean to not do something, and it may mean that I'm gonna do this thing and feel really nervous about it. And that's an experience that's worthwhile as well, is to keep going with something that you feel really anxious about.
Yeah. I'm just gonna ask you, two more questions. So one is, you moved from the suburbs, like you grew up in the suburbs. So I don't know, just what do you?
Suburb person.
I grew up in the suburbs too. Like what is that? Are you a real Torontonian? Like how do you kind of see yourself in terms of city, country, suburbs, location, Canada? I don't know. All
guess
of those
I've
things.
become kind of a city person, but I'm always confused about why I don't live in the suburbs. Like I live in a constant state of confusion about like the suburbs are great. So
Especially for kids, right?
for kids, yeah. I mean, I love living in Toronto. So I don't know. I guess I could easily see myself as either or living in the country, although I haven't done much of it. Yeah, I don't feel like weirdly picky about where I live. Like I guess I should say I'm weirdly unpicky about where I live.
That's really interesting. And I guess I also just wanted to ask about, I don't even know if I want to ask anything. I just want to say I loved the essay about Road to Avonlea and how you went back and really, really hoped that no one would recognize you. And then we're kind of like, wait, why isn't no one looking at me? Like, what's going on? And I guess I just wonder, like, what's it like to be you? Like, you're so famous. And, like, what's it like to walk around?
I'm not really. Like I really yeah, I don't get recognized like constantly, and when I do, like people don't care that much. like people will talk to me like I've known them for a long time, but that's what's good about one of the things I love about Toronto is like no one's that impressed. So it might be like, oh yeah, that movie you're in did good at the box office, nice work. Like as though like I saw them yesterday. But no, like it's not like I have many days where nobody recognizes me because actually like most people don't go and see the kinds of movies that I make or we're in. Like the majority of the population don't care at all.
Okay,
so,
you should see the text I've been sending for the past 2 days going, oh my God, do you know who I'm interviewing?
Oh, that's
so
but that's you, and I appreciate it. Thank God for you. But yeah, I mean, it certainly was like it was really hard when I was a kid because that show was so big and I felt very exposed and very scared, and it's a very strange feeling to have people you don't know things about you. Although I guess I don't think it's that strange, or I wouldn't have written this book.
Yeah.
I have a leg to stand on there. But yeah, I do feel like it was a lot when I was a kid. It's way less now, which is good.
Well, and you're also making choices about what it is that you're sharing with people, as opposed to having people project some idea of who you are, especially as a child. Yeah. I think that we should open it up for audience questions, because I feel like I'm hogging the wonderful Sarah Polley. So, yeah, do people have comments or questions that they would like to add?
We're good.
Yeah. Okay. I think is there a mic runner? Yeah.
I could also just project or...
Try, go ahead.
People at home.
Oh, yeah, you should.
Thank you. Sarah, yes, such a pleasure to be here. I wonder if you could comment on the relationship between writing for the screen, whether a documentary or fiction, as opposed to long form, memoir style. Is it more freeing to not have to worry about the visual components, or actually is it harder because you don't have other layers to rely on? So I just hoping you could comment on that.
It's both. I hope I don't talk forever in answer to this question, but I have a lot to say. So first of all, I would say for me, it's really it's sort of a liberating and thrilling feeling to write long form and to write a book, because it's what I always wanted to do. Like, since I was a small child, that's what I wanted to do. And then I ended up in film, and I sort of found this way to be a writer in film and take that and translate it. But I'm actually now back to the thing I originally wanted to do, which is an amazing feeling. But scripts, I think I was astonished by how hard it was and the responsibility of it, because a script is always a blueprint, right? Like, you don't ever have to have a perfect script. There's 1,000 stages before that thing is going to camera, and then you have the whole editing process. You have a lot of people with a lot of opinions involved. You're collaborating visually, you're collaborating with actors. So you're creating a map for something. It's not a final thing that anyone's ever gonna see. So there's a certain amount of pressure that's off. The sort of feeling of sitting down and going, oh, this sentence is the sentence. Like, this either works or it doesn't, but there's nobody else. You know, I had amazing editor, Nicole Winstanley, and I had Virginia Smith in the States, and so I had them, but like, this was sort of my responsibility to make this work and to make it live on its own as its own artifact. And I've never had that responsibility before. And so I think, like, with screenplays, I mean, people like to make it sound really complicated. And I think there's this whole mythology around craft and formulas. And when I listen to people on panels talk about screenplays, I have not a clue what they're talking about. I realize maybe I'm not smart enough to do this. It's made so oblique, I think purposefully, because I actually think it's much easier than people want to admit. Because I think if you know films really well and you care about them and you have a good idea, like, it would pain a lot of screenwriters that you probably write a really good screenplay without knowing all of the rules. And I think it's just made into this very, there's an elitism around the art of screenwriting that I think is ridiculous. Whereas, like, I think that, like, there is just no easy way out with writing a book. Like, it's either working or it isn't, and it's all on you. And I think I wasn't prepared for how hard it would feel to write a book, because I thought, well, I've been writing forever, and it's like, yeah, but not really.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My question's kind of an extension of that one, which is, I'm curious how working on the themes in this book has impacted your filmmaking practice. And to put kind of a finer tip on that, I'm wondering, with women talking, if there's a particular kind of danger toward which you hope to be running with that project.
Yes. Yeah, I was sort of dovetailing the writing of the book and the making of the film. So I was writing the book, and then the film was supposed to happen, and it didn't. So I continued the book, and then I was, you know, screenplay, book, like, it was all kind of, and these projects really fed each other. Like, if you see the film, you'll see a lot of things that are echoes of the book, and vice versa. Like, they really spoke to each other. I mean, it might not be good. I don't want to, like, oversell it. I'm just saying they might speak to each other. It could be incompetent the way they speak to each other. Yeah, I mean, I think what's amazing about Miriam Toews' book, which the film is based on, is because it takes place in an environment and a community that is foreign to most of us, it allows her to ask really hard questions that I think we're not quite ready for. But you can sort of listen to those questions and hear them and engage with them in a way that feels safe, because the context is so distant. If you're not, you know, from a community like the community of women in the story are Mennonites, although we don't say the word Mennonite in the film because we don't really want to, like, pinpoint it. So that there's a certain amount of danger in that. Making the film on its own, I had to overcome a lot of fear to do that. I hadn't made a film in 10 years. My family was very, very locked down in the first year of the pandemic. And the idea of going onto a set and being in a collective environment was really, really scary to me. For some people, that was really scary. For some people went back to work right away, either because they wanted to, or not because they didn't have a choice. But we all had different, levels of risk tolerance. Mine was very low, extremely low. And so suddenly, I was going back into a set, and I came very close to pulling the plug on the film. I had a big meeting with MGM where I was basically like, I can't do this, I'm not doing this. So, and it was like the numbers were super low in Toronto that summer. We were being tested 3 times a week. We were in zones. It was like the amount of money that went into the film industry's protocols was sickening compared to the average warehouse, like really horrific. But all of which is to say it was a very safe working environment that I was terrified of, and then just realized there were like hundreds of people who that was their employment for the summer. And it would have been a really big deal if my anxiety had taken all those jobs away. But I realized a lot of stuff was coming up for me. Like I was saying things on the call, like with like all the MGM people. I was like, I'm not gonna die making a movie and no one else is gonna die either. And they were like, and then at some point, one of the producers, and it was so embarrassing because once you write this book, you can't get away with anything anymore. So like the producer was like, called me and went, I know where you're coming from. I've read your book. And I was like, fuck, like now I can't. Or like I tried to get out of being on stage recently, like presenting something, and I was like, I'm just not feeling great, and I just don't want to take a chance. And they were like, we'll have someone else on stage with you. And I just realized, oh no, they all know I have stage fright from my book. Like I can't make excuses ever again. But so for me anyway, making the film was really hard. But then ultimately such an amazing experience, and I'm so glad I didn't miss out on it. I'm so glad that I didn't, for so many reasons. So. Yeah.
Hi, I feel nervous. I just wanted to ask about the book cover. I love book covers, and I didn't know how to interpret this one, whether it was a beam of light or a fissure, and just wondered if you had, how much input you had into making it. I also love the color. And just wondered in terms of the creative process, kind of how that went for you.
We went through a lot of versions of it. The cover's by Kellyanne Hill at Penguin Random House, and she's amazing. I don't know if she's actually technically part of Penguin Random House, but she's an incredible cover designer. And I mean, it's funny, I've never actually like talked to her about what her inspiration was for it, but to me it's like, I think it's my spine. Yeah. And I think what I sort of get from it is, that the danger is sort of in the spaces between things, and that like that light, it's that Leonard Cohen line of like there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. And so I see like a lot of things in the cover, and I'd love to hear her riff on how she got there, but it just, as soon as I saw it, I was like, yeah, that feels like the right one. I just knew I didn't want my picture on the book. That's all I knew. And it's not. There's a picture there, but my picture's not.
That was over here.
Hi, congratulations. It's an amazing book and an honor to meet you. I just wanted to ask you about, using this kind of mantra of run towards the danger within the context of healing from the concussion. It also seems like it's a theme throughout, your entire life that, continues even now that you have recovered. But was there like some kind of a moment where you realized, now I'm going to write the book, now I'm recovered? Or do you still continue to see this as like improving your injury that's like always going to be a part of you and like continues to have like no upper limit of how your healing journey can continue?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do feel like what was amazing about the concussion recovery, which for those of you who haven't read the book, basically I was told after 3.5 years of a really difficult concussion that the hiding in the dark room and the limiting my activities was actually making me sicker. And that, and again, this is not a prescription for everyone with a concussion. Every concussion's different. I'm not a medical professional, but what I was told that helped me was the things that triggered my symptoms were things that I had to do more of because my brain was getting weaker at the things I was avoiding. So, I got better very quickly, like within 6 weeks after suffering for 3.5 years and trying everything, after this kind of exposure therapy alongside all these other exercises I was given by this doctor in Pittsburgh. But what was amazing was when that 6 weeks was over, it was a process that kept unfolding. Like it wasn't about a brain injury anymore, but it was about the limits I'd placed on myself and the way that was limiting the way I saw the world, my relationships with people, what I chose to do, what I thought I couldn't do, what was too scary. Like, I started to really feel that, and I still do on an everyday level recently there's a really hard situation at work where there was sort of a really difficult conversation that had to happen between people. And I did not want to be there for that or have anything to do with it, but it was like this moment of going, just because it's hard doesn't mean it doesn't have to happen, and to like actually take some responsibility and go, yeah, I'm gonna walk into this conversation that I would normally run the hell away from. That's part of that. Like, I'm still in that treatment of like, just because I don't want to do it or I'm uncomfortable with it doesn't mean something really important might not come out of it. So I do feel like, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's tiring. Like, I have to say, like, my husband's like, your next book should be called Sleeping. Like, because it's like, it is like, you know, sometimes like you do need a moment. And I used to go to the Shambhala Center and do meditation classes. And this amazing guy who used to be my meditation teacher wrote to me about the book and said, I really like the idea of it. The cocoon stage is also important. As the Buddha said, not too loose, not too tight. And I thought that was a good reminder, because it can also, like, that mantra is really important. It can also make you kind of manic and a little bit, you know, unthinking. So I think, again, it's like calibrating, where am I, and am I too far into this sort of hiding and cocooning, and have I been there too long, or do I need to kind of slow down and listen to my body? I think that's just a constant question that I'm starting to live with, so. Thanks.
There's someone back there right in the middle. Hard to reach.
I want to ask you a question about your film, Away from Her. Can you talk a few minutes about that? It was such a unique film, and you know, dealt with Alzheimer's, and just a really great story.
Thank you so much. It was my first feature film. It was a Alice Munro short story that I fell in love with, and I had just worked with Julie Christie as an actor a couple of times. So when I first read the story, I immediately saw Julie's face and just saw the film. So I didn't have some grand ambition to be a filmmaker. I'd made a lot of short films, but I suddenly just knew that I had to see her play that part. And I was really interested in memory and the vagaries of memory and the slippages in memory and the inconsistencies in memory, which sort of remained an obsession for me, I think. And I think at that age, I don't think I would have articulated it that way or even known that that was what I was drawn to. It was only after I'd made other things that I realized that's a thread that I seem very drawn to. And I think with all things that you keep coming back to, like as an artist, I don't exactly know why. That's why I keep coming back to it. You know, like I have a whole bunch of theories, but I kind of almost don't, it's like a subconscious obsession that I keep coming back to these same themes over and over again and don't have words for it, which is why I'm making films about it. So, yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks very much for this. I read the book last week really quickly, and I plan to buy it tonight. I was a big fan of Road to Avonlea as a kid, and also Ramona, and I have a 5-year-old now who's resisting reading it with me, but I'll keep trying.
I think 6.
Okay.
6 is good for Ramona.
Next year. I was just wondering, when I read the book, you talk about a lot of very difficult experiences as a child actor and the traumas you experienced, but you don't really get into what made you want to start acting to begin with. I was wondering if it was your mom as a casting director was involved, or were there joyful experiences? Was Ramona a good experience? And when you talk about Eve becoming interested in acting, are there things that you do hope she'll get out of it?
Yeah, Ramona actually was a good experience, and I hadn't remembered that when I wrote the book. And I remembered it when Beverly Cleary died, and someone asked to interview me, and I suddenly went, that was kind of okay. And I think the reason that was kind of okay were the producers were in television because they were passionate about children's education. They were the people who did Mr. Rogers. Like, these are people who weren't in it because they were making a product or trying to sell something or trying to make a great show. It was like they had one agenda, and it was the well-being of children, and I became part of that for them. I'd never experienced that before after that was very unusual, but it was a good experience, which of course I block out the good experiences. And yeah, I mean, I think with kids, like, there's so many great things that you can do. I mean, first of all, they play imaginary games all day. They can put on a play themselves. There's amazing programs in Toronto, after-school programs and summer camps. So I think that there's a way of expressing that passion and getting to explore that that's not in a professional environment. It doesn't stop Eve from wanting to be a professional child actor and talking to me about it every day, which is just some kind of amazing life lesson I'm supposed to be learning right now of, like, you know, having to have that conversation and really having an eager child actor on my hands. But there's so much time to be an actor, and in the meantime you can do all this fun stuff. And, you know, there's kids who want to be firefighters and doctors and they can't do it when they're 10. So I don't know why acting should necessarily be different. But yeah, I think it's complicated. One thing I'll say in terms of how I got into it is the story that I told and believed to be true for my whole life as a child actor was that my parents didn't want me to be a child actor, but I wanted to do it so badly, they finally gave in. And then you know, again, Eve is contradicting everything I'm about to say in terms of the story you just told. She's like, you know, refused all my evidence. But basically, I was working on this documentary about child actors for years and years and years, and I did tons of research. And one of the things I noticed that was a connecting thread was that everyone tells that story. Shirley Temple tells that story. My mom didn't want me to do it, but I wanted to do it so badly she gave in. Shirley Temple was 3 years old and like working like crazy hours. And I just started to have this moment where I went, well, I don't buy all of these kids' versions of this, or even the version they're telling as adults. So I guess I should be questioning my own. I don't think I had like stage parents that were extreme. In fact, they were much more balanced than most of the stage parents I met on sets. I think they were way more grounded and cynical about the industry than most. So I did okay, but I can't imagine that my parents didn't have something to do with the beginning of it and bringing me in for auditions. And I can't imagine there was something there. The other thing that's really common with child actors, and so many of the ones that I've met that are really successful or being pushed or working too much is, and I hate to be gendered about this, but often the mom wanted to be an actor and it didn't work out. And again, I hate that that's a gendered statement, but that's my experience of it, is that there are a lot of moms out there who didn't realize something that their kids are realizing. And also, there's an economic factor. There's also a lot of people who are like getting access to stuff that is completely cut off. And so you're sort of like saying, this will pay for my kid's university education. Like, it's hard to judge that, you know, in a family that doesn't have that covered or doesn't have that locked up. So I also am like kind of checking myself lately and going like, am I also like looking at these families and coming from a place of real privilege where my parents could probably just afford to send us to university? That's, you know, like I do think there's also there's a class issue here as well. And you're seeing a future and an access for your kid that it would be very hard for you to lay out. So I don't know what you do about that, but I am certainly like tempering my judgment a little bit these days.
Thank you so much for your work. I'll just say that the chapter that moved me was when you were talking about your high-risk pregnancy. I felt I had to finish it instantaneously. You write so beautifully about your experience there. So I guess my question is, you know, you talk so poignantly about your experience in the hospital and the fear that you have, and then the whole industry surrounding new motherhood, right? What was one thing that you wish you knew before about this whole industry, about parenting, about pregnancy, about this whole like capitalist, you know, market surrounding parenting? I thought that was so beautifully written, and that was actually my favorite chapter in your book.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, like the one thing I knew, I think I'd dig deeper to find out what I really felt and thought. about the right things to do, because there was like a lot of like, you know best, you're the mom, but here's 18 parenting books and like a whole bunch of people looking at you really judgmentally if you're not wearing your baby 24 hours a day. You know, like it was like, it's really hard to check your gut, especially like, as I say in the essay, like, you know, if you've lost your mother young, there's an insecurity about mothering generally that, you know, people like, and you know, Dr. Sears is a very positive thing. If it was a positive thing for you, for some people, for me, it was a really, really damaging book to read in terms of what I felt my consistent responsibility had to be to a baby, which was to basically never put it down, never use a stroller, always sleep in bed, never like with the baby, you know, never, you know, don't stop breastfeeding till they're 5. Like I felt those were like my instructions, and it almost killed me. So I guess what I tell friends now who are having babies who are struggling is like, the best barometer of how your kid's gonna do is how you're doing. So whatever is like actually making you happy and healthy and function best, like provided you're not a narcissistic nutcase, like I feel like is probably gonna be best for your kids. And the more I figure that out, you know, I think the better off my kids are. I mean, I hope this isn't being recorded, because then they'll like play it in a therapy session and be like, see how deluded she was? She thought she was doing well. But I do feel like, there's, and also just now having been a parent for 10 years, you see these waves of trends go by. So it's like, this is the way you parent, which when you're in the moment, you think this is really, they've figured it out. They've done the research, they've done the studies. This is the way you have to mother a baby. And then you realize 3 years later, that advice changes. Like, what was I doing? These are these fads of parenting that go by, and I think trying to find your place in that, especially with the amount we're in communication with each other now through social media, and there's just so much pressure to be a certain way, and then that way changes. And I guess I'm trying to be more interested in what my instincts are and what my own experience has taught me, because I read enough parenting books to sink a ship.
Well, and you have 3 kids, which kind of makes you an expert, I would say. Again, maybe your kids shouldn't listen to us saying that. I think maybe, should we take one more question? I don't know how we're doing for time, but yeah.
Back there.
Hi, thanks. I have a very late follow-up to the first question. I love your film Stories We Tell, and I am struck anytime I revisit it by just the vulnerability and intimacy of something that you're working through and also sharing so deeply. And then I read your book and I was like, oh my God, okay, it's next level. And I just wondered if you could speak to that intimacy and vulnerability of turning a lens on yourself in filmmaking, in writing, and even how generous you're being with our questions right now.
Thank you, I really appreciate it. I think I always think no one will ever see it or read it. Like I think that's part of the process. But I think I'm also not, I don't think I have a big drive to be famous, but I'm also not a private person at all. I think those two things can get confused. So like people will be sometimes saying to me, but you're such a private person, why would you do this? I'm like, have you ever spoken to me? like if you've ever like run into me, like some of my mom friends from the playground are here, but I want to know the most intimate details of people's lives, and I want to tell them mine, and I do want to connect on that level. Like I'm deeply interested in the really hard, messy stuff, and I'm not shy about sharing that, and I really like those intimate conversations with people. So it's like, I guess, a bit of a stretch and weird to then share it with a bunch of people that you don't see and you don't know, and you don't even get to feel their response to it. But it doesn't feel out of character for me. And I think it's not only a positive attribute. Like I'm making it sound really good right now, but I feel like I do feel like I don't do a ton of small talk, and so like revealing things. I mean, putting this book out to the world was terrifying, I should say. Like, it wasn't easy. But I don't think it was like the exposing of myself that was scary. It was like the potential impact on other people and how people who were portrayed in the book or loved people who were portrayed in the book would feel.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you
has
so
been a
much.
really incredible conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for staying with the heat.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah, it's pretty hot.